In August of 2013, Russell Kane walked the west alley of his feeding pens outside Perryton, Texas, carrying a yellow legal pad he no longer wanted to look at. At sunrise, the number on the pad was 7. By dark, it was 19. 19 steers down in 3 days. 19 tags crossed off. 19 animals from a bloodline he had spent 12 years building for frame, feed conversion, and heavy carcass weights. They were the kind of cattle every buyer in the Panhandle said he wanted. Tall-backed Charolais and Simmental-influenced calves with enough muscle to make a sale barn go quiet for the right reasons. But that week, the sale barn did not matter. The heat index hit 117 degrees. The wind quit. The dust hung in the alleys like flour. The water tanks stayed full, but the cattle stood over them, with their mouths open, fighting for air that did not cool anything once it entered their lungs. Russell called the vet twice. By the second call, the vet had stopped using reassuring words, and then, on the fourth afternoon, Russell drove past a pasture 5 miles east of his place and saw something he could not explain. A bunch of red-hided calves were standing around a water tank, irritated, sweaty, and alive. Behind them, in the shade of a crooked mesquite, stood the little red bull everybody at the co-op had laughed about. The bull was not impressive, not by Ochiltree County standards. He was short-hipped, smooth-coated, almost too calm, with a hide that lay flat against him like wet paint. He looked like the sort of animal a serious cattleman would apologize for owning. But the cattle around him were breathing. Russell slowed his truck until the gravel popped under the tires. He did not stop. He had 3 more dead steers at home and a number on a legal pad that was becoming expensive enough to feel personal. Still, he looked at that bull, and for the first time in his life, Russell Kane wondered whether the animal everyone had mocked was not small. Maybe he was built for a different kind of weather. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand the county. Ochiltree County sits up in the Texas Panhandle, where the land runs wide and hard, and the sky can make a person feel either free or exposed depending on the season. Cattle money there has always respected visible things: pounds, frame, uniformity, auction weight. A steer that looked big in the ring looked safe on paper, and for decades that was close enough to truth. The local rule was simple: breed for growth, breed for carcass, breed for cattle that turned feed into weight fast enough to keep the banker comfortable. Heat was treated as a management problem. Put out more water, change feeding times, build shade where you could afford it, watch the weather radio, hope the wind came back. Very few people asked whether the cattle themselves had been selected for the wrong enemy. That was the question Marisol Reyes brought home in 2011. Marisol was 24, the oldest daughter of a family that had run cattle on leased grass west of Booker since her grandfather bought his first set of cows after working 18 years on other men's ranches. Her father, Ignacio Reyes, had expanded the operation carefully, never flashy, never over-leveraged, never first to try something new. Their herd looked like most serious herds around them. Black baldy cows, Angus influence, some continental blood on the terminal side, calves that did well in ordinary years and looked right to ordinary buyers. Marisol had gone to West Texas A&M, studied animal science, and come home with a habit that irritated people before they could name why. She wrote things down, not just weights. Everybody wrote down weights. Marisol wrote down respiration rates, coat scores, panting behavior, time spent in shade, recovery after hot nights. She wrote down which cows kept grazing when the temperature crossed 100 and which ones stood at water until dusk with foam at the mouth. To the older men at the co-op, this sounded like college noise. They had survived drought before. They had sold cattle through bad summers before. They did not need a 24-year-old woman with a notebook telling them that the climate inside a cow mattered as much as the temperature outside the fence. The first time she said it publicly, the room made sure she understood her place. It happened at a county cattlemen's supper in February of 2012. The official subject was mineral costs and drought preparation, but the conversation drifted into bulls, as it always did. The spring sales were coming, and men were comparing expected progeny differences the way other people compare football scores. At the center of the talk was Wade Hargrove, the biggest voice in the room and the owner of nearly Bang and Numcham Head spread across 3 operations. Wade did not bully people exactly. He simply spoke with the confidence of a man who had been agreed with for so long that disagreement sounded like bad manners. Marisol waited until the talk turned to summer gains. Then she asked if anyone had compared moderate-framed, slick-coated British composites against the high-growth continental crosses during sustained heat. The room did not laugh immediately. That would have been kinder. First, it got quiet. Then Wade smiled. He said a small bull could survive the heat because he did not have enough engine in him to make money. He said buyers did not pay for pretty hair, they paid for pounds. He said if Marisol wanted pasture ornaments, that was her family's business. A few men laughed. Then a few more laughed because laughter is contagious when it protects the person in charge. Marisol looked down at the folder in front of her. Inside were 3 papers she had printed and marked with yellow tabs. One from a university heat stress trial, one from a southern forage program, and one from an extension bulletin on slick hair cattle and heat load. She had highlighted the same idea in all 3. A high-performance animal is not high performance in every environment. Sometimes it is only high performance until the weather asks a different question. She drove home after the supper without telling anyone she was angry. At the kitchen table, she laid the papers in front of her father and told him she wanted to run a trial. Ignacio did not interrupt. He had the stillness of a man who had learned that the land punishes quick opinions. Marisol wanted to buy a red pole-influenced composite bull from a breeder near Ardmore. Not a fashionable bull, not a giant bull. A moderate-framed, slick-coated red bull from cattle selected for heat tolerance, forage efficiency, and mothering ability instead of maximum size. She wanted 38 cows in the east pasture. She wanted to breed them to the red bull, keep the calves separate, and compare them against the ranch's standard Angus cross calves for 3 seasons. Birth weight, weaning weight, average daily gain, veterinary costs, summer behavior, recovery after heat events. Ignacio read the first paper, then the second. He asked the question that mattered to him. What happens if the calves are light? Marisol said they probably would be at first. He asked what happens if the buyers discount them. She said they might, unless the cost side changed enough to matter. He asked what happens if the men at the co-op are right. Marisol said, then we'll have numbers that prove they're right. That answer did not make Ignacio comfortable. It made him willing. 3 weeks later, he gave her the east pasture and 38 cows. He did not call it approval. He called it a trial, which was as far as his faith could honestly travel. The bull arrived in April. His registered name was Foxfire Ledger 214, but everyone called him Ledger. He stepped out of the trailer, slow, as if the county had been expecting him, and he was in no hurry to disappoint it. He weighed Motngan Saucham Jaime pounds, nearly 300 pounds lighter than the bulls. Wade Hargrove was advertising that spring. He had a red coat so slick it flashed copper in the late sun, a wide forehead, and a way of standing still that made him look less lazy than certain. Marisol watched him walk to the water tank, drink, and settle under the mesquite at the corner of the pasture. Her father watched too. Across the road, a pickup slowed. Then it kept going. By the end of the week, everyone knew. The co-op version of the story was that Ignacio's daughter had bought a hobby bull with school ideas and ranch money. Wade Hargrove joked that the bull would save on feed because there was not enough of him to feed. Someone else said the calves would look good on Christmas cards. Marisol heard all of it secondhand. She did not answer at the counter. She answered in the notebook. Ledger settled 34 of the 38 cows that first season. The calves came in the spring of 2013, mostly red, some red white-faced, a few dark calves that looked more like their dams. They were smaller at birth by an average of 5 pounds. They got up fast. They nursed hard. They did not look like the calves buyers were used to seeing from the Reyes place. Marisol wrote down every number that helped her and every number that hurt her. That mattered. A person trying to win an argument only records evidence that flatters the argument. A person trying to learn records the whole weather. By early summer, the Ledger calves were trailing the Angus Cross group in weight by 21 pounds. Wade would have enjoyed that number if he had known it. Marisol did not hide it from herself. She marked it, circled it, and waited for July. July came like a door closing. The National Weather Service warned about the heat dome for 9 days before it settled over the Panhandle. Ranchers prepared the way. Ranchers prepare when the forecast turns mean. They checked floats on tanks. They shifted feeding before dawn. They opened gates for airflow. They put up temporary shade. They watched the cattle and pretended watching was control. On the second day, the afternoon temperature hit 109. On the third day, the heat index reached 117. By then, Russell Kane's big steers were in trouble. Their bodies were furnaces. The very traits that made them profitable in normal conditions, high intake, fast growth, heavy muscling, were adding heat from the inside while the sky pressed heat from above. This is the part of cattle genetics people do not see in a sale catalog. A bull can pass on growth you can weigh. He can also pass on a problem you only discover when the weather corners the animal. Large-framed cattle eat more, and cattle that eat more produce more metabolic heat. Thick coats hold heat. Dark hides absorb it. Heavy muscle is not free. During ordinary summers, those costs hide inside good performance numbers. During a heat event, they step forward and present the bill. The bill came due across the county. Russell lost 19 head, roughly 16% of the pen he had been finishing for September delivery. The direct loss, once he added purchase cost, feed already invested, veterinary calls, disposal, and lost sale value, came to about $52,000. Insurance softened the impact, but did not remove the lesson. Other ranchers lost fewer, some lost more. Almost everyone lost gain. At the Reyes place, Marisol walked both groups before sunrise and again near sundown. She took respiration counts with her phone timer. She scored panting. She noted which calves stood bunched in shade and which ones kept moving out to graze before evening. The Angus Cross calves showed moderate to severe heat stress on the third and fourth days. 3 needed treatment. 1 never fully recovered its appetite for the rest of the month. The Ledger calves were not magic. They were hot. They panted. They crowded the tank. Their flanks moved hard, and their ears hung low by late afternoon. But they stayed inside the line. Their respiration rates peaked lower. They returned to grazing sooner in the evening. By morning, more of them were chewing again. During the 4 worst days, the Angus Cross calves lost an average of 0.35 pounds per day. The Ledger calves lost 0.07. The gap was not dramatic enough for a photograph. It was dramatic enough for a ledger. That was the pun Marisol refused to make out loud. At weaning, the old genetics still weighed more. The Angus Cross calves averaged 563 pounds. The Ledger calves averaged 542. A 21-pound gap is not nothing in cattle. At the sale barn, nobody treats pounds like philosophy. But the full sheet looked different. The Ledger calves had lower treatment costs, less post-heat recovery time, and steadier feed efficiency after the heat dome broke. When Marisol priced the calves under 3 scenarios, direct sale, retained ownership, and a conservative drought risk model, the red calves were not a joke. Under the heat risk model, they were ahead, not by much, enough. In October, Marisol gave her father a 6-page summary. Ignacio read it after dinner while the house was quiet and the ceiling fan clicked above the table. He spent the longest time on the page that did not look dramatic. Cost per pound of weaned calf. Then he looked up and said, "How many cows next year?" Marisol said, 80. He shook his head. She thought he was refusing. He said, 55. And keep the black calves separate. If you're right, the numbers will show it again. She accepted 55 because 55 was not a no. It was a gate opening. She also asked to present the results at the county cattlemen's meeting that winter. The room was smaller than her memory of it. Maybe because dread makes rooms larger before you enter them. 40 ranchers, metal folding chairs, styrofoam cups of coffee, the low smell of dust and wool coats. Wade Hargrove sat near the front, arms crossed, smiling before she started. Marisol did not argue with him. She did not mention the joke about pasture ornaments. She handed out the sheets and walked everyone through the trial. She showed the birth weights first, including the lighter number. She showed the summer weight gap. Then she showed the heat stress recovery chart, the veterinary cost difference, and the cost per pound. She said one season did not prove a breed was better. She said one season did prove the county was measuring performance too narrowly. Wade waited until she finished. Then he said what everyone expected him to say. One summer was not enough. Small calves were still small calves. The sale barn still paid for weight. A red bull that happened to look good during one heat wave did not overturn decades of selection. His words were strong. The room around them was less strong than before, because Russell Kane was sitting 2 rows back, looking at the sheet in his hands. Russell did not speak during the meeting. Afterward, he stood near the coffee urn until Marisol walked by. Then he asked what breeder had raised Ledger. Not loud, not in front of Wade. Just quietly, like a man asking the first honest question after a very expensive summer. Marisol wrote the breeder's name on the back of an extra handout and gave it to him. That was the first crack. The second year did not help her as much, and that may be why the story is believable. The summer of 2014 was mild by Panhandle standards. The Ledger calves performed fine, but the old genetics did what they were bred to do. They grew. At weaning, the Angus Cross calves were ahead by 26 pounds. Treatment costs were nearly equal. The economic advantage almost disappeared. Marisol reported that too. At the winter meeting, Wade said the second year proved his caution. Marisol said it proved hers, because the point was not that red pole-influenced cattle would beat Angus Cross calves every month of every year. The point was that genetics should be matched to risk, not just to ideal conditions. A ranch does not fail in average weather. It fails at the edge. In 2015, the edge arrived and stayed. It was not the sharp disaster of the 2013 heat dome. It was worse in the way slow things can be worse. 6 weeks of hot afternoons, dry wind, nights that never cooled enough, pastures that lost color by inches, hay prices rising in every conversation, cattle spending more time standing than eating. By August, the county's calf crop was slipping. Extension estimates later put the average weaning weight decline around 38 pounds from the 5-year local baseline. Some operations running heavy continental influence reported drops over 50 pounds. At the Reyes place, Marisol was on her 3rd season of records and her 1st season with enough calves to make people stop calling the data cute. The Ledger-sired calves did something no one at the co-op expected. They caught the black calves. Then they passed them, not by much, 4 pounds on absolute weaning weight. But the number mattered because it broke the old sentence in half. The red calves were no longer just cheaper to keep alive. In a long, hot year, they were heavier. When Marisol ran the economics, the difference was not close. Lower treatment costs, steadier gains, and less condition loss put the Ledger calves $97 per head ahead of the comparison group. Across the 55-cow trial group, that meant num ngan ba bam alum in additional net return. Across the full Reyes herd, it would have been more than $17,000. That number did what 3 years of polite explanation had not done. It gave the idea a handle. Men who had laughed at a concept could not laugh as easily at $17,000. Marisol prepared the winter presentation with the same discipline she had used from the beginning. She included the bad year for her argument. She included the mild year. She included the strong year. She included the original birth weight penalty and the later improvement as she selected replacement females from the calves that held condition best. She called it genetic risk management. Not a breed revolution, not a miracle, risk management. That phrase traveled farther than she expected. A forage specialist from the Extension Service asked for her spreadsheets. A professor she knew from West Texas A&M reviewed her cost assumptions. Russell Kane bought 2 slick-coated composite bulls that spring and did not announce it at the co-op until after the trailer was already home. Wade Hargrove said nothing until October. Marisol was sorting heifers when she saw Wade's truck pull into the lane. He parked by the east fence and stayed in the cab long enough that she knew he did not want this visit witnessed by anyone else. When he finally stepped out, he walked to the fence and watched the red calves moving through the grass. He said the summer had been hard on his replacement heifers. Marisol leaned on a sorting stick and waited. He said he had been looking at his own treatment costs. He said he had always thought of heat as a facilities problem. Shade, water, timing, alleys. He said maybe that was only half the problem. Marisol did not rescue him from the silence. Finally, he asked if she still had the Ardmore breeder's number. There are moments people imagine will feel victorious. Then they arrive, and victory is smaller than expected because the years it took to get there were heavier than the sentence can carry. Marisol could have repeated his joke back to him. She could have asked whether he wanted pasture ornaments. She could have made him pay for the laugh in the only currency available. She did not. She said, "I'll give you the number, but don't buy the bull because I did. Look at the records. Look at your cows. Decide what risk you're actually breeding for." Wade looked at the calves again. Then he said, "I was wrong about the question, not wrong about the bull, not wrong about Marisol. Men like Wade rarely hand over the whole apology in one piece. But wrong about the question was enough to mark the day. In January of 2016, Marisol presented at the High Plains Beef Conference in Amarillo. She was 28. She wore a dark jacket, scuffed boots, and the expression of someone who had learned not to ask permission from a room before telling it the truth. Behind her was a slide with 3 years of data. 204 calf seasons, heat stress scores, weaning weights, treatment costs, and net return comparisons under normal and high-risk weather. She did not hide the mild year. That made the hot years harder to dismiss. She told the room that the mistake was not choosing Angus, or Charolais, or Simmental, or Red Pole. The mistake was pretending a single definition of performance could survive every summer. She said the beef industry had spent decades breeding cattle to win in ideal conditions, then acted surprised when ideal conditions failed to appear. She said uniformity looks efficient until stress reveals that every animal has the same weakness. She said a bull is not just a source of calves. A bull is a bet on the kind of year you think is coming. And if the years are becoming less predictable, then the bet has to change. For a second after she finished, the room held still. Then someone in the front started clapping. Russell Kane was not in the front, but he was there, and he stood before most of the room did. Ignacio sat near the back with his hat in his hands. He did not stand quickly. He stood slowly, like a man allowing himself to be seen believing in something. Marisol saw him over the heads of the crowd. Later, in the truck on the way home, Ignacio said, "Your grandfather would have trusted the numbers once he saw the calves." It was the closest he came to saying he was proud. It was enough. The Extension Office published Marisol's trial summary that spring. It went to a few thousand producers across the Panhandle and western Oklahoma. Within 2 months, she had 31 calls and emails from ranchers asking about the protocol. Not all of them wanted Ledger's bloodline. Some wanted to test Hereford influence. Some wanted slick-haired Angus. Some wanted to compare shade, water placement, and genetics together. That was the point. The door that Wade's laugh had closed in 2012 opened again, and this time the room did not belong to one voice. By 2018, the Reyes Ranch had moved most of its cow herd into a moderate-framed, heat-adapted crossbreeding program. Ledger was retired that year, sound but slower, his muzzle graying, still calm enough that Marisol's young nephew could scratch his neck through the fence, while Ignacio pretended not to worry. They kept several of his daughters. They bought a second bull from a different line to avoid narrowing the gene pool. They continued to weigh calves and record heat behavior because the lesson had never been that Ledger was magic. The lesson was that a notebook can keep a ranch honest when tradition gets too confident. Russell Kane did not lose cattle in the next major heat event. He lost gain, like everyone did, but not animals. The next winter, he told Marisol the new calves looked a little smaller than he used to like, and a lot better than dead ones. 14 producers in the county and the surrounding area adopted some form of heat-tolerant genetics over the next several years. Some went with red pole-influenced composites. Some used slick-haired Hereford lines. Some changed nothing except their willingness to record which cattle failed first when the weather turned. Wade Hargrove bought 2 bulls, then 3 more. He never became a public evangelist for Marisol's program. That was not his nature. But at a later cattleman's supper, when a younger rancher asked whether slick-coated cattle were just a fad, Wade did not laugh. He said, "Depends what you're trying to survive." That sentence mattered more than an apology. Ledger died under the mesquite in the east pasture in the spring of 2021. He was old for a working bull, heavy in the joints, still carrying that copper hide that had made the co-op jokes so easy a decade earlier. Marisol buried him near the fence line, not with a monument, just a steel T-post and a small brass tag wired to it. Ledger 214. No slogan, no speech. The animal had already made his argument. Years later, Marisol's daughter, Elena, then 5, asked why the ranch did not have more trees. She had been sitting in the pickup watching cattle crowd the narrow shade beside a windmill, and she wanted to know why shade had to be rare if everyone knew the cows needed it. Marisol almost gave the practical answer: water, fencing, cost, grass competition. The old way the pastures had been laid out. Instead, she heard the shape of her daughter's question. Not why don't we have trees? Why did everyone accept a pasture design that made suffering look normal? That winter, Marisol took out a notebook and started reading about shelter belts, silvopasture, native grass recovery, and shade distribution in grazing systems. She called the same extension specialist who had asked for her spreadsheets years earlier. By spring, she had a 5-year plan to test tree strips along 2 sacrifice lanes and track soil moisture, grazing distribution, and cattle heat behavior. Ignacio was 70 by then. His hair had gone white. He read the plan at the kitchen table, the same table where Marisol had once asked for 38 cows and 1 unfashionable bull. This time he did not take 3 weeks. He said yes before he finished the second page. That is how a ranch changes when it learns the right lesson. Not all at once. Not because one person wins every argument forever. It changes because a laugh loses its power, because a number survives a hard summer, because a child asks the next question before the old answer can defend itself. Marisol Reyes did not prove that one breed was better than every other breed. She proved something more dangerous to the people who had laughed. She proved that the county had been breeding for the years it wanted, not the years it was getting. The heat came. The big calves broke first. The little red bull stood in the shade, and the notebook kept telling the truth long after the laughter was gone.